Hi everybody. Just while my slides are being put up, I wanted to take the opportunity to thank Joyce and her staff very much for pulling this together and inviting me to present. As you know, Joyce and I are from different political parties, and I think it reflects very well on Joyce as a community MP and on her commitment to this issue, that this crosses party boundaries and that we can work together on this for the best interests of Vancouver Point Grey and Vancouver Quadra. So there was a lot of new information for me in Joyce's presentation because she's had a meeting with Canada Land, so some of this will shift. But this is this was the best information I had as of 30 minutes ago. This is pre-1892. This was a picture from the City of Vancouver archives with scratched into it, "Here stood Yalmu Indian Village," which, as far as I can tell, it's looking out to the water from about 4th. And in the foreground, you can see the golf course that was the historic use of, for a long time, of the Jericho land. This is another picture from the archive of the Vancouver Golf Club. Built a clubhouse in the area, and it was leased, the Jericho lands, including all the way up to the water, were leased for $100 a year. You can imagine that, until 1924, when the rate was increased to $2,500 a year. In 1942, the federal government started assembling a large package of property that included 140 acres from British Columbia that it leased, as well as 9 acres that they bought the lease out from the country club for $55,000. And the interesting thing about the assemblage of this property is that much of it was conditional on its use being military use, and this becomes important for a punchline shortly. The feds were only allowed to use the land so long it was actually used for the Canadian Air Board in one case, and in a wireless station for another. And the reason this became important was that the feds bought a significant amount of property, the parcel that Joyce was talking about earlier in 1947. But then from 1952 to 1965, MPs and mayors launched a campaign to try to get the federal government off of the beach and to turn it into a park. And in 1966, the city was stunned, stunned the province anyway, with the news that the use of the land, including the beach, was conditional on its use as military. It actually still belonged to the province, and the city didn't know that, and the province didn't know that. So that illustrates for you some of the complexities around the use of this land and all the different players who have been involved in it. The headline is "Planner Shocks City Council with Discovery." I'd be pleasantly surprised to realize I owned a bunch of beachfront in Vancouver. Unfortunately, we know for sure that the province did receive payment for, and it was fully purchased, the federal portion of land for $351,000. And I don't know if you can see it, but it says check received on the memo. So the check passed, and there's no question that the feds own outright the land in question on Joyce's side of the map. And this is a bit more of a schematic map, and you can see on the bottom here is 8th, on the top is 4th, and then the federal half that Joyce had on her map. There are actually 2 parcels of land that are both provincial land, and it ends at Trimble Park, so it doesn't include, it ends at Discovery there, so it doesn't include that, that as well. Here's an aerial view. You can see West Point Grey Academy there, maybe if you've got really good eyes, right here to kind of orient yourself. Trimble Park. And you can see that military housing over in the bottom right that was in Joyce's slide. So where I pick up the story is February of 2011, the provincial and federal governments got together and they hired a consulting firm called Coriolis to advise them on the highest and best use for the property, how it could best be developed. And Coriolis put on their website a brief description of what they were asked to do. Both levels of government retained us to conduct a detailed evaluation of the development potential of the land, to estimate the costs of a major rezoning and redevelopment plan, and to estimate the net yield from disposition of the land. So at least in February of 2011, this was a cooperative provincial federal government plan and proposal that was coming from a consulting firm. Things were pretty quiet from the provincial perspective until February of 2013. You may recall the Coast Guard base controversy about the closure of the Coast Guard base. During that, there were unhappy, I believe, people within the administration, either federally or provincially, I don't know, who leaked a memo that suggested that there was a parcel of properties being put together for co-development, and that incidentally, it had some information about Jericho. So we're gathering our information just so you get a sense about how your elected representatives are getting information about what's happening from leaked memos in the media. I don't even have the memo. The memo says that agencies have, quote, presented the First Nation equity proposal for the Jericho Beach Department of Fisheries and Oceans, DFO, and RCMP site in a land negotiation that the government wants to wrap up by May or June 2013. Quote, this proposal unlocks the value of these properties for the economic benefit of all parties, and the negotiation must establish a joint venture agreement between First Nations and Canada Lands Company, which will capture the nature of the partnership, says the memo. And the memo doesn't identify which First Nations are involved, but I've always assumed that it was probably Musqueam. Following this leaked memo, in July in the BC legislature, I took the opportunity to ask Andrew Wilkinson, who's the minister next door in Colchena. He's also the minister responsible for provincial land, to ask him what the plan was, what he knew about what was happening in Jericho. He said there are pending leases that run until 2020, which would include the Point Grey Academy lease, I assume. The province has not entered into any formal talks with First Nations, the City of Vancouver, or other stakeholders. It's probably stating the obvious that we will observe with detailed interest what happens with the federal lands. I expect there will be fulsome consultation if there is any progress on any plan to do anything differently other than the status quo with the Jericho lands. So some nice, unambiguous language about the intention of the province to consult, which is nice to see, so long as he remains the minister. Because we can see these things happen really quickly sometimes when people are moved from one portfolio to another. It was interesting to hear Joyce's presentation because on August 15, 2013, there were media reports that actually the land had already transferred from the military to Canada Lands Company. So now to hear from Canada Lands that actually they're still finalizing that is again an example of the confusion around this issue, including in the media. Following that coverage, Andrew Reimer, who couldn't be here, said in a media interview something really important, that, quote, they're not legally, talking about the federal government, they're not legally required to consult with either the public or the city when they're thinking about what they want to do with the land. They're not subject to our zoning laws and other things. So again, heartening to see in Joyce's presentation that they intend to present permit applications to the city. I filed a Freedom of Information request in December of 2013 for the Coriolis report. You remember the consulting report. I asked for a full copy of the report. They knew what I was talking about because they sent it over to me. I got the title page, title Evaluation of the Development Potential of the Provincial Jericho. Michael can already tell where this is going. Evaluation of the Development Potential of the Provincial Jericho Lands. Introduction. The Altus Group has been retained to complete an appraisal of the land. As an input to the appraisal, Coriolis Consulting Group was retained to, and then it's all blanked out. Implications for development concepts. Based on our review and surrounding development and zoning, the development concepts that are likely worth considering for the subject site are as follows. It's all blanked out. And then pages 9 through 41 are redacted for the following reasons. January 30th, a journalist that I was working with that was interested in the story was in correspondence with the province. A senior bureaucrat within Mr. Wilkinson's ministry wrote back to him and said, quote, didn't intend for the previous statement to be ambiguous. To clarify, the province is not considering the sale of the Jericho lands. Period. Fast forward, May 6th, 2014, again in the legislature, again Mr. Wilkinson. As far as we know, the federal government's continuing to engage with the First Nations. Nothing has changed. So just a whole lot of news about nothing, actually, is what I'm bringing to you here today. The big dates, the only date that I was aware of until Joyce's presentation was 2017, which was the eviction of the military families, 2020, the expiry of the leases. But as we've seen in the past, the federal government hasn't hesitated to buy out leases on this property in the past. So there were a bunch of questions that come out of this, and one additional question that I have that comes out of this, especially in light of Joyce's presentation, is there was a really important court decision that just happened a few weeks ago in relation to the Caribou Chilcotin in northern British Columbia. And so this is a First Nation that had established a title claim and was negotiating with the provincial and federal governments for rights to title in northern British Columbia. And the BC Supreme Court, for the first time in Canadian history, recognized something that it had described before but had never actually recognized, which is Aboriginal title to land. That decision was monumental for groups like Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, because they have rather clear and undisputed historic uses of properties like Jericho. And it is very likely that that decision has serious impacts for Canada Lands Company in their discussions with the Musqueam or the Squamish or whoever it is that they're talking with, in particular because previously their only obligation would have been consultation and reasonable accommodation of traditional sites and so on. Now, with recognition of title, the game may have shifted fairly dramatically in terms of the negotiating power of the Musqueam within that conversation. I don't know anything about the negotiations, but I do know that was a very important decision for discussions like these and for properties like Jericho that could really put it off, as Joyce said, for a generation. Very interesting decision that opens up a whole other angle on this. So the point of the presentation was simply to share everything that I know with you, which is that as far as the province is concerned, as far as the minister is concerned, nothing is happening, and nothing has happened since the 2011 Coriolis report, although they don't want to share what the results of that report were. They have received clear proposals for different kinds of development on the land, but they're not sharing them with the community. That's it. So thanks very much for coming in. I just wanted to thank the West Point Grey Residents Association as well and say that as soon as I get an answer from the minister or I get a document or whatever, I send it off to Phyllis or somebody else from the West Point Grey Residents Association so they can send it to their list. So if you're not on their list, you may not get that information. So if you're interested in getting up-to-date information, please do make sure you're signed up as Joyce suggested. Thanks very much.